Hello and welcome everybody, and welcome back. I'm Ben, and today we're going to be looking at another fantastic rendition of The Picture of Dorian Gray as we continue in this series looking at multiple adaptations of this story. And this is actually, believe it or not, one of my very favorite adaptations, and I'm going to explain a little bit of why, but also point out some of the brilliant things it does, considering that this was just an hour-long TV show. This was not even a feature-length film. It comes in at under an hour with commercials. And the commercials are pretty funny, but we'll get to that too. This was the Breck Hair Company who presented TV shows. This was pretty common. You would have a TV show series. This was back in the 50s and 60s. It was very common. You would have an official sponsor, and when the show was presented, they would be sort of like the executive producer, and so they would have sole rights to advertise. And so throughout this, you're going to see a lot of commercials for the Breck Hair Company, their shampoos and stuff like that. This is from 1961, again, just an hour long, and it stars one of my favorite actors of all time, George C. Scott, as Lord Henry Wotton, and I think he is, in fact, my very favorite actor to have ever portrayed Lord Henry. And it was something you have to understand about these adaptations is that Lord Henry is actually as desirable, perhaps more desirable for actors to play than Dorian Gray himself. He's just a real swine of a character, and I think George C. Scott captures that venomous, almost slimy quality, but in a very rugged and manly and no-nonsense confidence, something that I actually never quite got from George Sanders in my favorite production, which was the 1945 production. But you know what? We're going to get to that one later, so let's just hop right into this production. There it is, the Breck Golden Showcase. Now, this actually has a very misleading beginning, because, oh, well, just watch. I'll let you see for yourself. What a fantastic opening. We're establishing the narration, and, oh, there's the infamous, the quote-unquote fatal portrait of Dorian Gray. And I don't know if you noticed by his name, but if you're familiar with the 1945 Dorian Gray, you will remember that Cedric Hardwicke, the famous actor Cedric Hardwicke, was the narrator of that film, and he reprises his role to come back and narrate this TV production. For now, the screen goes black, and there we go. Okay, the Breck Hair Company, so we're getting into it. Oh, look, a painting. Could that be perhaps a Basil Hallward painting? Are we going to open by showing him painting somebody other than Dorian?
Woman with beautiful hair.
Well, she does have beautiful hair.
Breck. To bring out the natural beauty of
oh no, look at that. They just totally punked us with a shampoo commercial in the middle of our Dorian Gray. I was really surprised. But seriously though, hats off to the director of these commercials for saying, hey, you know what? Let's tie the commercial into the movie. That's pretty cool. Good job, guys.
It's your best work, Basil. The best thing you've ever done. A picture like this sets you far above all the other painters in England. You must allow me to think of a title for it, something to do it justice.
I'm going to call it The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Why on earth something so pedestrian as that?
Because that is what it is.
You mean you did this from life?
Yes.
Does your Dorian Gray really look like that?
I'm not sure I really captured him. He has such a simple and beautiful nature.
What I like about this version is that although you can tell that they have changed some of the dialogue to make it more flowing for a film adaptation, and a lot of versions do that, a lot of versions don't, much to their detriment. Look at some of these camera angles you're getting here too. This beautiful framing in thirds, and the dimension, the depth that is given by having Lord Henry step to the back. And look at those beautiful sets. All of the framing in this, it doesn't really feel like a TV movie shot on video, although you can tell it has been shot on video. It feels far more like a real film, a film that just happened to be in 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, I particularly like how they do this little moment. Every version, pretty much, keeps with the book where Lord Henry gives a monologue while Dorian is being painted, which changes Dorian's entire way of thinking. But in this version, we actually see during the painting of Dorian that we flash over to see Dorian and Harry at a party together. And we see that this corruption takes place over several days, And when we cut back to the painting being finished, it's on a completely separate day with Basil and Dorian and Harry just all hanging out together again. It gives a real sense that this version of Dorian is not as easily persuaded. So the idea that this corruption takes place over multiple days is, I just think, far more believable, and ultimately, really, it's far more filmic, I think. Because it's something that only film can do. Only movies can pass time the way that a movie can. Plays cannot do this. Books cannot do this. This sort of visual crossfading of events is something that only film can do. Something that I will probably point out again before the end of this little review is just how cool it is that, though it's only an hour, they keep a lot of the dialogue from the book, even little lines like them commenting on how if the painting was to age, Basil wouldn't like it because the lines would look horrible on his work. And, of course, like in every version, or more or less every version, Dorian looks at the painting and says, if only it was the other way around, if only the painting could grow old, and I could stay forever young. I would give anything for that. I would give my soul for that. Something else that's pretty interesting, that gets cut out of some versions because, well, to be fair, it is kind of an awkward line for most actors to try to make it sound realistic, is that Dorian says that Basil can't destroy the painting, even if the painting upsets him and makes him jealous, because the painting is a part of his soul. And I really do enjoy the way they play that moment in this particular version. Something else that is just spectacular is that when we see Dorian being molded into a mini version of Lord Henry, the narrator says, as we get a great little pan-in shot on George C. Scott, that it gave Harry a real joy to hear his views echoed back to him with all of the passion of youth. It says also in this version that he experiences a real joy in influencing people, even though he says that all influence is evil and immoral because you're taking away something from somebody's self. It actually makes Harry even more of a villainous character, that he himself thinks that he's taking a part of Dorian's soul by turning him into somebody else by his influence, but he does it anyway because he likes taking part of somebody's soul away from them. That's pretty freaky. Dorian goes and discovers the actress Sybil Vane, who he falls madly in love with and immediately wants to marry. Now, we talked about this in other videos, how this is important because it shows how life mirrors art, art mirrors life. He falls in love with an actress for her art, and when her art begins to suck, then he falls out of love with her because her art was more real to him than the person. Sybil Vane calls Dorian Prince Charming, doesn't even know his real name, just calls him Prince Charming, and it's gotten across in a way that is believable. Now, in the 1945 version, there's a fantastic little scene where Angela Lansbury, playing Sybil Vane, says that she will call him Sir Tristan because he is like a knight riding in to save her. Now, that's a lot more believable, and you can see where the change came from, but I do like that they kept it as in the book. This version is closer to the book than the 1945 version, which is fascinating because it is 40 minutes, or, well, yeah, 50 minutes shorter than the 1945 version. Something else you're going to notice here is that there's a setup where part of the filmic grammar of this film, and yes, despite the fact that it is just a TV movie, it does have filmic grammar in it. Nearly every scene ends by fading to white. Now, black fades are far more common. You see them in almost every movie you'll ever watch. A fade to black normally indicates finality. It's the ending of the scene. It's the ending of a moment. It's the ending of an era. I think that there's some great films that use this to add a sense of finality to different epics of a person's life, and the moment being over forever, as if you can't escape and come back from it. But fading to white does something very different. It usually indicates either ambiguity or euphoria. You get ambiguity, open-endedness, disorientation. And every scene in this movie, pretty much anyway, ends with a fade to white. It's as if to say, This is a question mark. What will happen next?
Oh, she is. I'm going to marry her.
That's impossible!
Now, of course, we're introduced to James, Sybil's brother, who vows that if Dorian ever hurts her, he will murder him. James says that he has to leave on a ship tonight, and so he leaves, and Sybil goes out on stage to give the worst performance of her life. And again, just look at some of these beautiful cinematic camera movements. And yeah, you did see these in some shows, but it wasn't really that common. I really enjoy the way that Sybil Vane's performance is presented in this version. Typically, in this sort of story, you're going to get some very over-the-top things happening, and I've seen some versions that do that. But I like that in this version, she just says the lines with no emotion, and she speeds through them. "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name." And she's just prattling through it. And then there's a point taking from the Silent movie, if you remember, that we watched a couple days ago, where one of the other actors is feeding her the lines because she forgets the lines. The lines mean nothing to her now because she knows the reality of love. The art means nothing anymore. Her life has not influenced her art. Her life has sucked the meaning out of art. And that just shows how much wiser Sybil Vane is than Dorian, who, Dorian being such a shallow character, without the art, he cannot experience the joy of life. And, of course, that's why, ultimately, he dies when the art of his life ends. I really like that when Dorian confronts Sybil in this version, it's on the stage. I think it adds an extra little layer of irony. And he comes out saying the lines to Sybil, reciting it, and showing that he is actually a better actor than she is. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Hamlet when he comes out and confronts Laertes, saying that he can put a show on of grief as good as any man. "Oh, you want to jump into her grave to out-grief me? Well, I will get into her grave with her, and you can bury me with her." It kind of adds a little extra poetic layer of that sort of thing on top of it. And this is actually my favorite version of this moment, where we see Sybil explaining why she is acting badly. Because unlike a lot of versions, where the whole thing comes across like two 2-year-olds, whining at each other, which we'll get to one of those versions later, don't worry. In this version, Dorian being cruel is genuinely cruel. They show the layers and the depth again by having Dorian stand while she's sitting. She's in the foreground, he's in the background. We see a lot of movement and stage business. The blocking is great, the camera movement. This scene is just a great scene. As Dorian's running away from her, she yells out, "I love you better than anything in the whole world." And who's that a quote from? It's a quote from Much Ado About Nothing. It's Benedict's line to Beatrice. Remember, he says, "I love you better than anything in the world." Is not that strange? So this is actually her reverting back to acting when he says, "Your art sucks now, so I don't love you anymore and I'm going to leave you." And she's begging, "Please, I'll go back. I'll be a great artist again, but please don't leave me. I love you." That she reverts back to using the words that she memorized for a role. And not even a role that was written for her, but a role that was written for somebody else. And again, if you want to say I'm reading too much into it, well, whatever, fine, okay. But I don't think I am, and I think that that was intentional. And it just shows the intelligence and the depth of thought that was put into some of the things that they do with this production. And I'm not even telling you all of them. Some of these you just have to go and watch the film yourself. It's only an hour anyway, and it's on YouTube, so you may as well. As in almost every version, Dorian goes home and finds the painting has been altered. Cedric Hardwicke uses pretty much exactly the same lines he has from the 1945 version, and this scene plays out very similar, right down to the music sting being very similar.
There, your hair looks lovely, just lovely. And to keep it that way, of course, Breck Hair Set Mist.
Of course, Breck Hair Set Mist. I don't know if you've noticed, but I use that myself, and I mean, look at what it does for my hair. I mean, good golly. The next morning, Dorian comes back in to see the painting, and unlike in the silent film, we see that him moving that gigantic screen in front of the painting actually is pretty valid in this production. After all, the painting is a floor-to-ceiling, life-size painting, just like it is in the book.
You would have to make amends. He would have to go back to Sybil Vane, marry her, and try to love her. He could not bear his soul to be ugly. So he would write Sybil and implore her forgiveness.
Now notice that narration there. He's only asking Sybil to take him back. He's only seeking repentance because he couldn't bear for his soul to be ugly. That is such an... gosh, what an ass thing to do, right? I mean, it just shows right from the beginning that his intentions are not good. Now, I don't mean to just harp or make comparisons to other versions constantly, but it is pretty amazing how in just a little TV movie, they actually are far more cinematic than a lot of other versions where Harry shows up and tells Dorian, oh yes, you know, Sybil Vane is dead, this happened, this happened, this happened. Instead, we just see her dead body on the floor and cut to Harry saying, of course there'll be an inquest, and Dorian sitting on the stairs because he's so shocked he can't take it.
She killed herself, Dorian. She was found on the floor of a dressing room. She had swallowed something.
I was writing to ask her forgiveness, to ask her to marry me.
Good resolutions, Dorian, always come too late. Their origin is pure vanity.
What a fantastic line, and the way George C. Scott delivers it, I really can't say enough. This man was born to play this role. While I'm talking about George C. Scott, let's just draw attention to some of the other great actors in this film. Of course, John Fraser playing Dorian Gray is fantastic. One of the best Dorian Grays that I have ever seen. Now, you might recognize his face because he's been in, well, everything. Susan Oliver plays Sybil Vane, and again, she's just been in a ton of stuff, but it's really amazing that she and John Fraser never became bigger names because they're both fantastic actors. However, the one that I really want to point out to you, because it just shows how talent and great things can come from the most unexpected places. There's an actor sort of in the background. He plays Mercutio in their version of Romeo and Juliet. In fact, I don't think we ever even hear a line from him. His name is Jonathan Frid, and you might know him by face because he played Barnabas Collins in the Dark Shadows series, the soap opera that the terrible Johnny Depp movie is based off of. He's there in the background. So Dorian goes to the opera with Lord Henry that night, just as he does in the book, but we get to see a little bit of that, unlike most versions. And we see him meeting new women on the very night that Sybil Vane died. What an ass. Of course, he goes home to see the painting again, and Basil shows up in a great moment of tension. Look at that whip pan. Unlike many versions, and naturally in 1961, you would expect them to cut the homosexual undertones or overtones out of this scene. And so what they really do is just have Basil kind of tell Dorian off. However, look at this great cinematic camera angle. The way the movement of the camera, it follows Dorian, and as it follows Dorian, it moves so that the screen covering the painting covers about a third of the shot. Basil's attention turns to it, and now we have a great framing. And look at that. The back of the painting is taking up a third of Dorian's shot. The front of the painting, covered by a screen, is taking up a third of Basil's shot. The camera moves with him, and now we move from a medium into a close-up. What a smooth camera movement. As Basil starts to leave, he says the line from the book, Basil, we are friends, and we've always been friends. We must stay friends. Don't leave angry. And Basil says, well, will you let me see the painting? Dorian says no, and Basil leaves. And in this version, they do not talk again for 19 years. Dorian takes the painting upstairs with the help of his servant, and they lock it in the schoolroom. And again, this is one of those versions that draw major attention to the beautiful irony that he's locking away the object of his sin and degradation as he ages in the room that he grew up in as a boy doing his education. The narration shows that Dorian understands and is going to relish in the fact that he will enjoy eternal youth as the painting ages. We get another fade to white, and we see Dorian once again degrading other people. Of course, his sin is not necessarily the destruction of his own soul, it's the destruction of the people around him. His influence, just as Lord Henry says, is so negative and so horrible that he's actually stealing the souls of people around him. We also get a little flash of how he corrupts Alan Campbell. Now, this is very different from what is implied in the book, where the book pretty much implies that he has had some sort of sexual relationship with Alan. But in this version, we simply get sort of an explanation that he has gotten Alan to frequent these whorehouses with drugs and partaking in these drugs and opium and stuff. Then we get this great shot, and this is where the majority of the montage happens. Instead of just flashes to white, the picture actually flashes as a negative, and in the flash, we see the changes happening as the painting alters. And we get to see very specific alterations as his face begins to warp and distort. We get to see these changes happening in real time, basically, bridged again by that wonderful white flashes that we've already grown to expect at this point, right? And now we're getting to see a lot of these changes up close and personal, and that gets us to expect that we know what we're going to see the next time we see the painting. But we do not. It's about to get way worse. And here we go. Dorian's now 38, and musical sting. In 3, 2, 1! Yeah, just as young as he was the day the painting was well, painted. Oh, hey, another commercial break! Let's see what this one's for.
Now, banish dandruff with regular use of Breck Banish Dandruff Treatment Shampoo.
Get rid of dandruff? Oh, thank God, at last!
Dandruff-free. You can wear dark clothes with confidence when you banish dandruff.
Man, that's why I've never worn dark clothing in my life. I mean, look at all this dandruff.
Breck Cream Rinse makes all the difference.
Hello, yes, I would like to order 3 cases of the Breck Dandruff Shampoo, please. No, my hair's not coarse. I think I'll be fine. This scene where Basil and Dorian meet for the first time in over 19 years, this really is very, very close to the way the 1945 film portrays it. And again, this just kind of shows that the director clearly really, really liked that movie and based a lot of this adaptation on it. Paul Bogart is the name of this director, and he directed a lot of the episodes of the CBS Playhouse, as well as a lot of episodes, I think actually the majority of the episodes of All in the Family and The Defenders. Now, when I say this man was a great director, I am not blowing smoke. This man has the credentials to prove it. He was the winner of 5 Emmy Awards for his work in television, and nominated for a whopping, wait for it, 21 Emmys! That's just nominations in his, just a fantastic career. I mean, this man, I really don't understand how he did not become a bigger name in directing. It's sort of like that guy, I can't think of his name, I'll put it up on the screen, who directed Psycho 2. The fact that some of these directors did not become bigger names when they are such brilliant, brilliant directors is just criminal, isn't it? In this version, however, Basil actually says, "You told me you came alive the day I painted that picture of you. Well, if there's some connection between the painting and what people are saying about you, then I want to know." If I had one criticism about the film, it's that that line is a little too on the nose. It's a little too cheesy and, you know, in your face for my taste, but it's the only line that I can think of in the film that's like that. With another flash of light, Dorian takes Basil upstairs to show him the painting.
I don't know whether I regret it or not.
Man, look at that. When you see it in close-up, this painting is really one of the more grisly and gross-looking of them. The sunken, beady, popping eyes. The fact that the nose is turned up a little bit. The fact that there's some sort of strange disease or mold growing on his face. The little wispy hairs. All of that awful mucusy looking stuff coming out of his nose. And the fact that his mouth looks like it's covered in either warts or some form of degenerative herpes or something. I've mentioned before that I do think that the best adaptation in terms of the painting itself is the 1945 production, where it's almost as though the entire canvas has caught some sort of leprosy. I think in that movie they actually say it's as if the canvas was partaking in some moral leprosy. And it's just like the whole painting is disgusting. And it's beautifully disgusting, though. Macabrely beautiful. And in this version, I think that facially, it's actually even more disgusting and more over the top. It's less beautiful, more gross, whereas the Ivan Lee Lorraine Albright painting from the 40s is actually gorgeous. It's just gorgeous in a disgustingly macabre sort of way. It's like a painting made out of mold. But this is like real body horror to look at. And I actually really think that this version, considering it is just, again, I hate to keep restating it, but it is just a little TV production, less than an hour long, including commercials. And yet, the attention, the way they've made this horror story, this gothic horror story, more of a horror than some versions that are an hour and a half or 2 hours, is really kind of masterful. The use of music is also great in this film, and I don't think I've really mentioned it much until now, but it sort of pays homage to the 45 version while also being its own thing, and again, it doesn't feel old-fashioned. These music stings feel fairly dramatic, even by modern standards. They keep in almost the entirety of this scene where Basil gets on his knees and begs Dorian to pray with him, to ask for the sin of his pride to be forgiven. In this moment, as he goes to stab Basil, he screams, "I didn't paint it, you did!" As if to say, the sins of his life are Basil's fault. This also is just a great moment of tension. It's almost like something out of a Hitchcock film. In fact, honestly, the framing of the shots are even like something out of a Hitchcock film. Dorian comes down the stairs to create an alibi. He goes and grabs his coat, throws it on, and then walks out the door so that he can ring the doorbell, alerting his servant that he's home, pretending that he's forgotten the front door key, to give himself an alibi that he wasn't home when Basil was killed. So you may be wondering, well, what's so brilliant about that? Well, it happens more or less in one shot. And as the camera is moving in the foreground, we are constantly seeing the suitcase of Basil Hallward. Dorian overlooked a key piece of evidence and left it laying out. Then when his servant lets him in, Dorian comes in and we keep the camera in the same place so that suitcase is right in the foreground the whole time. And then as Dorian's going up the stairs, he notices the suitcase and the dramatic music starts. Dorian comes and stands in front of it, and he uses his body to hide it, and the whole time asking his servant to take a letter to Alan Campbell on the morrow. And then with another flash of white light, we see our last glimpse of Basil Hallward's suitcase, the last chance that poor Basil might have gotten to be avenged. The next day, Dorian brings Alan Campbell to his house in order to blackmail him into destroying the body of Basil Hallward, and all of this works out pretty close to the way it does in the book, so I'll just leave it there. Alan does end up doing it to save his reputation. What is a little different is that Dorian asks Harry to come with him out to the country so that they can get away for a little while, and he can spare himself the knowledge of Alan Campbell being upstairs the whole time destroying the body. However, I don't think it works quite as well in this case, because I do find it hard to believe that Dorian would leave his painting unattended with another person, and in fact, in the book, he does not do that. So, I do think that was probably just a little step too far, but it's the only thing like it in the film, so I can forgive it. Now, I would be completely remiss if I didn't mention another just masterclass element of this little film. It actually, if you can believe it, despite the fact that it's only an hour long, it actually has a 3-act structure. Yeah, how weird is that? The death of Sybil Vane comes in right at a third of the way through the film. The death of Basil Hallward comes in right at 2/3 into the film. And then we get about 10 minutes of build-up before we begin a final 10-minute climax. I mean, that just, again, shows you the sort of thought that they put into adapting this into just an hour and making it feel like a movie. Of course, adding another element of Hitchcockian suspense, we see Lord Henry practically interrogating Dorian about where he was last night, despite the fact that, of course, Harry doesn't know that anything bad happened. Next, we meet a character who is almost never in any adaptations of Dorian Gray, Hetty, the gardener's daughter. So sure, her backstory has been changed a little bit, but the name Hetty is almost never used in any adaptation, and the fact that she is a country girl who's kind of simple, that falls in love with Dorian, is also rarely ever present. Dorian and Hetty have a great little conversation, and it's very well written, and the way Lord Henry shoves his nose into it as he does with everything is great. Dorian eventually gets home and sees that Alan Campbell is done with his work, and Alan is leaving, and we get a couple last little lines from Alan.
Saved me from ruin, Alan. I can never forget that.
Neither can I.
Again, simple, short, straight to the point, but very powerful. Dorian looks at his painting again, and just like in the book and in the 45 version, which does this to great effect with very dramatic camera angles and bright technicolor, we see that Basil Hallward's epitaph is written on the painting. Oh, another one! Let's see what this one's about.
Breck hair set mist. Soft, gentle, good to your hair.
Mother, may I borrow your hairspray? Oh, of course.
Mother?
Oh, not like that.
There's seriously only like 10 years difference between those actresses.
Evenly, all the way around.
Yeah, don't spray a whole bunch in one section at once. Put dozens of little sprays of hairspray in one part of your hair, so your hair will be hard as a rock.
Breck hair set mist. Such a soft, fine spray.
Such a soft, fine spray. Why'd she say it like she was getting off to that hairspray? I don't like it. I don't like anything about this commercial. Let's move on. In another scene that is very, very close to its 1945 counterpart, we see James Vane meeting Dorian in a tavern, hearing somebody else call him Prince Charming. And the fact that it's somebody, a woman specifically, that he's ruined calling him that, it seems to indicate something very subtle and kind of naughty. Seriously, the implications of this moment is actually quite risque for a 1961 television film. It sort of seems to be implying that the women that Dorian ruins, he actually asks them to call him Prince Charming, as though sexually or in some way he's trying to relive or recapture or undo the pain that he has caused to Sybil Vane by trying to see her in other women he consequently ends up ruining anyway. It's both kind of sad and kind of scary, and makes Dorian even worse of a person and also better of a person, depending on how you see it. It's handled, I think, a lot better than it is in the 1945 version, where one of the men that Dorian has ruined, and again, that movie is robbed of any homosexuality that you could possibly try to inject into it, one of the men just calls him Sir Tristan, and there's not really any good logical reason for him to do so, but this really, really works. And again, kudos to them being able to get this by the censors. Dorian convinces James that he's too young to be the man who caused her sister to suicide herself, and as James leaves, Dorian cackles like a madman. He goes to be with Hetty for a little while in his country home at Selby, but he ends up leaving her. And upon him leaving her, in order to quote-unquote save her, to keep her from suffering the same fate and ruin that he's caused everybody, we cut immediately to Lord Henry laughing at it. Look at this Citizen Kane-like angle. With Lord Henry in the mirror and in the foreground, Dorian framed not only in the mirror in the background, but within a doorway within the mirror. It just adds so many layers, so much depth to this little TV show. And of course Lord Henry is laughing at this because, as he says, Dorian thinks that he saved Hetty from himself, but what he's actually done is just set himself up as an idol. That he is so good that he has to leave her, and that by doing this he's actually done an act of cruelty to her. Now that she's been with and dated a gentleman, she's never going to be happy with the farmhand that she will inevitably have to marry because of her social status. Now this is used in this production to great effect to be the film's climax. By having this only good, charitable thing turned on its head and made to a sin of pride, Dorian is overcome with emotion, with the feeling of being trapped, just as he always felt. He was trapped by the painting, trapped by his sin, and that there is no way to change who he is. Lord Henry in this production is actually right. Again, a great, great shot in the mirror as Lord Henry puts his hands on Dorian's shoulders and begs him to know the secret of his youth. How have you gotten by with doing everything, and we've all had to pay the piper, but you are unscathed. You've had to pay nothing. And Dorian says,
I've paid much more than you think. I've suffered agonies you could never conceive of.
Reformation. Don't be silly, Dorian. You can never change.
I will. I'm even a little changed already.
You are what you are. And what you have always been. And what you will be.
he runs upstairs, desperate to see that the painting might have changed, that maybe his act towards Hetty was a good act after all. I personally really love the way they played this moment, because if you were a fan of the 1945 film and seeing the obvious inspirations, even down to the camera angles that were taken from that film and put into this film, and hearing Cedric Hardwicke's voice, you might be thinking, oh yes, he's going to run upstairs, and just like in the 45 film, he'll see it and say, oh yes, there is some slight change, it's already a little bit better, and that motivation might give just a glimmer of hope that he can be redeemed. He will stab the painting just like in the 45 film, and as he dies, he will plead God's forgiveness. Father, forgive me, for I have sinned through my most grievous fault. And as the painting reverts back, we get the uplifting music, and Dorian Gray, in the moment of his death, is redeemed. But then in this version, he pulls down, and just like in the book, the narrator says, the thing is more loathsome, if possible, than before. The painting has gotten worse because of what he did to Hetty. Of course, John Fraser closes us out with a fantastic piece of acting. I mean, really and truly, this man deserved to be more well-known than he was. He stabs the painting, and we hear a dreadful scream. Of course, Harry is already there, so Harry and the servant go up, replacing the servants from the book who come up and find Dorian. Harry's actually there, and I do like when they do that. I like Harry seeing this, and Harry being the one who is confronted with the full horror of what his philosophy has led to. Look at that great model on the ground. Looks just like the painting, and in fact, I'm sure they based the painting on this model. But I love that even the hands in this production are disgusting looking. They look at the rings, they realize it's Dorian Gray, and we see George C. Scott bringing home that Oscar gold, even in this little TV show, looking up at the painting, as beautiful as it was the day it was painting. And that was it! The Picture of Dorian Gray, with a fantastically dramatic ending that's not... What is that?
Take advantage of this special offer now. Breck Shampoo and Breck Cream Rinse, both for the price of the shampoo alone.
Couldn't they have at least put some horror music over it or something? It really destroys the mood, guys.
Are sold.
Hold on, though. I can get Breck shampoo for just $1? Well, no, I bought enough. I bought enough during this episode. I've got to cap it somewhere. I'm already in credit card debt. So that was the Picture of Dorian Gray. And once again, I just want to say, this is probably the most underrated version of this story ever put to film. It's fantastic. It's got it all. It's faithful to the book. It's cinematic. The editing is phenomenal for something of this time and done for television. The acting is brilliant. Not one person gives a bad performance. And the writing, gosh, the writing is just splendid. It incorporates the writing from the book. It edits down the lengthy conversations into their core elements and their core essence. You're not missing anything. When you watch this, you don't feel the absence of those lines from the books that are missing. And really, I would just love to see more of the adaptations that these people did, because, wow! So thank you everybody for watching. I hope this inspired you to go onto YouTube and watch the full version. It's linked in the description of this video. Watch it without me interrupting every 5 minutes. Give it a chance because it is one of the finer versions of this story. It takes what could have been a cheap cash grab just to get people to watch your hair commercials for an hour, and it turns it into a piece of, I think, really sublime cinema. So go and give it a watch. It's free, and you can't go wrong with it. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.